And oh, one other thing I need to mention, because this is the last free webinar before the early bird price ends for the 7-month program, I want to try and avoid those emails that say, I didn't know the price was ending. So I'm just letting you know that if you do want to sign up for the program, there's a special offer that's available through July 31st. And if you want to have a conversation with me about it, I'm happy to speak with you. Just let me know, email me, or write a note in the chat, and I'll know to reach out. So, well, Erin, thank you so much for participating in this free webinar, and thank you for also being, the first speaker in the 7-month program. Very grateful that you're coming all the way to Santa Monica, California, to join us. Really looking forward to spending time with you.
Me too.
So, for those of you who don't know Erin, he's the co-founder of One Thought. And he really works a lot. He works globally with businesses and organizations, helping them to see the benefits of how this understanding is helpful in terms of organizational development, leadership, all of the challenges and growth things that come up related to business. So it's fun to have you here. And there may be some of those questions that come up today. But when we were talking before the webinar, Erin and I, what we talked about is really looking at how leveraged it is to look in the direction of the spiritual nature of this understanding, but looking at it from a really very practical, ordinary way. And I loved how Erin was describing that. So that's the direction that we're going to be looking in today. And Erin will share for a little bit, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions. And like I said, we already have 2 hands raised, Erin, so get on with it.
Well, hopefully I don't speak and we end up with none or minus.
All right. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, when I talked with Rohini about this webinar, and she said, well, look, really the theme of these webinars is the spiritual nature of the principles, or the spiritual nature of life, whichever way you want to put it. And that's really something that I have quite a lot to say about, hopefully in an interesting way, hopefully in a little bit of a different way, because it's something that people talk about a lot. But I feel like I come at it from a little bit of a different perspective in some ways. So hopefully that will be interesting, and then hopefully there'll be lots for us to talk about. So the first thing that I wanted to say was I wanted people to know a little bit about me and how I got involved in this, which will kind of give you a feel for, how I see this. So the first thing that popped into my head while Rohini was introducing me is, I can really see the principles has been an education to me. It's an education to me every single day, the principles, meaning what Sydney Banks pointed to as mind, consciousness, and thought. And it started me off. I was very resistant to taking the principles seriously, meaning it didn't make sense to me to treat what George and Linda Pransky and Judy Sedgman and Dickon Bettinger and all the people, and Sandy Crott, Keith Blevins, the people that worked at Pransky and Associates, it didn't make sense to me to listen to them as if they knew anything useful. It just didn't make sense to me. And the primary reason for that was that I thought I understood enough about life to be getting on with. I thought I knew what life was. I thought I knew what I was dealing with, and I was just very dedicated to doing the best that I could. And rethinking any of that just seemed like a waste of time. It would be like driving in a perfectly good car and then deciding it needs to be another color. And it would just take you so much longer to get where you were going, and who cares when you're on the inside of it anyway? It just seemed like an irrelevant indulgence that was completely unhelpful. And what was an education for me was just how wrong I was. So the first thing that struck me that was the beginning of that education was there was something about life that I didn't understand that they understood. And as arrogant as I was, that wasn't something I expected to have happen. I treated my thinking like it was the inside track on reality. And, you know, if you wanted to know something, ask me. But if I wanted to know something, I would ask me. I wouldn't be listening to you. So what I saw, and just to cut the story quite, I was doing some research for one of George's books, and he wanted me to compare his work to other approaches in therapy. And I saw two very lost individuals. It was a couple, a wife that had been unfaithful and a husband that was upset about it. They were completely at odds with each other. They were very upset with each other. Can you hear a lot of background noise here, Rohini?
No, I can't hear it on my end.
Okay, great. So it's just me. It's terrible. I was about to take a break and go upstairs.
Is it background noise on Zoom that you're hearing?
No. It's in this.
Okay.
In this house. So, and there were two people who were not thinking clearly, who didn't know what to do, who were tormented by their own suffering, and whose relationship was in tatters, right? You know how other people's problems are so much easier than your own? You know, it's just like, oh, why don't they just do that? And then you say to them, oh, why don't you just do that? And they're like, you don't understand. And then they give you all the reasons why it's not that simple. Well, I expected George, who was working with this couple, to just tell this couple what they needed to do. And he didn't tell them anything. He talked super generally. I couldn't fathom the relevance of what he was saying, so I basically stopped listening. And then 3 days later, this same couple walks in looking fabulous, looking absolutely fabulous, full of life, full of energy, full of ease, full of confidence, full of well-being. They're holding hands. We haven't talked about their relationship. We haven't helped them with their relationship. And I'd never seen people looking so good. Like, you know, sometimes when people come off a really good holiday and they just look amazing, they look better than that. And I know they hadn't been on holiday because I'd been sitting with them every day. And when they sat down and George asked them how they were doing, they literally didn't have a problem with their situation at all. And not only that, they said what I was thinking on the first day, almost word for word. And that blew my tiny mind out of the water. I couldn't understand how they had answers without being given them, how they had well-being without anything changing, how they cared about each other without having worked it out. I couldn't understand it. And it got my attention. And after the session and they'd gone, George basically said, well, what do you think, Aaron? And I was like, that was utterly amazing. I am completely in awe of what just happened there. He said, well, isn't it good to know that people have what they need when they need it? And I thought, I don't know that. That's news to me. I guess that explains what I just saw, but I don't understand it. And that, seeing something that was profound and undeniable that I could not explain, told me there was something about life that I didn't understand. And that it was also happened to be something I was very interested in all of a sudden. And I kind of became a student of the work that the team at Pransky and Associates were doing. And to my surprise, as someone that was not really interested in business, when I started working there, or when I started interning there, the work that intrigued me the most was what I saw happen in businesses. And I didn't know why at the time, or what I thought at the time was it's the link between an understanding of the mind and the outcomes that people see in what they're doing. So I've also worked with some athletes, and that's exactly the same. It's like when their level of clarity, their level of consciousness, their state of mind changes, their outcomes change. And if anything, they're putting less strain into it, not more strain. And there's something about that everybody recognizes, whether you're nervous about an interview and it doesn't go as well, or you're trying to write something and you're thinking about it too much and it's not easy, or you're fallen in love with someone and the relationship's wonderful and you're not really trying. or you just have a fantastic day at work and things just pan out brilliantly and you didn't even have to strain. There's something about that dynamic in life that everybody feels, but it's so different to what we think is going on that we never really fully respect it. If you sit down with a bunch of people who and you talk to them about relationships, like, isn't it funny when you're desperate to have a relationship, it's like living in a desert. And when it's not really on your mind and you're perfectly happy, there are all sorts of opportunities pop up. Jobs are the same way. If you're desperately looking for a job, it's hard to come by. And when you're not, opportunities seem to come up. And everybody knows that, but they never really say, oh, what's that about? Like, what's going on with that? And that's what fascinated me about the principles in business, was there was something about the principles that really addressed the power behind life and the way it comes through the consciousness or the feeling or the mind of individuals. It's almost like our minds are a gateway for the power behind life to make it into this dimension. and we all experience that, and we all know that to some degree. Like I work with salespeople, okay? They know that, in the sense that they know that being tense, uptight, and insecure is bad for business, and being in the zone is good for business. They know that. The football players I work with, they know that. They don't know what drives it, so they get super paranoid. Like, oh, maybe my lucky socks will help. Maybe my lucky breakfast will help. Maybe my listen to the right station on the radio. No, that's the wrong station. Oh my God. And so, but they do know that, and they feel that, and there's a way in which everybody knows it, but it's not. We don't know it enough. We don't really see it in an uncompromising way. So that's what I've been interested in, is highlighting and exploring the power behind life, so that people can really, I don't know how to say it, so that people can really experience the joy and the richness and the excitement of how much capability we have. And I've been just thrilled by that. And I'm my own first guinea pig. So, when I started learning about the principles, I was interested in how my freedom of mind and ease gave me effortless leverage in things, whether it was learning a language or, doing my PhD or whatever it was. And lo and behold, it worked in every single situation. My inclination was to start thinking about things, to get tense or to try harder, but I would go with the principles and say, all right, well, if, more power comes from more openness, like you want less restriction, you want more ease. It's a very natural thing. So I would experiment with doing less in my mind, in a way, surfing rather than swimming, in the energy of my mind. And I'll be darned, it would work every time. And when it wouldn't work, I'd look and I was paddling too much. I could tell, because my muscles were tired. My muscles were tired. I was fatigued or strained. I didn't feel good. And it was amazing in every single area. Like, we used to, when I worked and lived in Lacona, Washington, we had a lot of corporate clients on the East Coast. So we would fly to the East Coast, get in, having not had a day, not sleep all night, and then have terrible sleep for a week and do trainings. And I thought, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to do a good job. I'll be tired. And then I thought, well, hold on. If the principles are right, there's a limitless spiritual energy. I'm a limitless spiritual energy, but for the way I limited my thinking. If that's true, then I don't need to worry about it. There's infinite energy. I don't need to worry about it. And my personal mind says, yeah, right, whatever, Aaron, you better watch the clock and hope you get to sleep in 10 minutes, because it's already 4:15 and you have to be up at 7, and then you know what will happen. And I'm like, well, if the principles are right, that's all irrelevant. It's all completely irrelevant. And I'll try that. And lo and behold, you're present in the moment. You're not doing anything. There's energy abundance. energy abundance. Unbelievable. I didn't know that. So treating the principles as a guide to what was true has been an endless education in the constantly available power behind life, and that it doesn't come from the physical realm. Anyone that's had kids or does night shifts knows this, that you can physically, if you look at your physical rest bank account, you should be heavily in debt. But when your mind's free and you're engaged in something, there's more than enough energy. And that points to the fact that we're not drawing from our physical energy, our food, our water. I mean, in some ways we are, but there's something more fundamental going on, which to me is what Sydney Banks pointed to when he said, look, life is spiritual, reality is spiritual, we're spiritual, that there's a pre-physical energy, and to me, knowledge and intelligence and power, whatever you want to call it, that we are living, and the degree to which we consider that that's true, we get less limited by what we think is running the show. You know, how many hours there are in a day, and etc., etc. So to me, that's, the more I consider that, the more I see that's true, the more respect I have for that fact, right? So that's the first thing I wanted to say. But the interesting part, I think, is that most of my work is in a business context. So I'm working with people that are not interested in that at all. In fact, they're not even interested in the thought part. In fact, they're not even interested in anything we're doing. So when we do a 3-day training with a company, we're sitting with 8 to 20 people who can't wait to get out of there. Because every training they've done up till now has been an utter waste of time, and they got too much going on anyway. And who are the latest idiots that we have to tolerate? So that's the setup. And what's interesting to me was, I know that people need to get in touch. People need to have a more open, that's the wrong way of saying it. When people are more at ease, they're more naturally, have a more natural, less restricted flow of that, you know, the energy that they are, or that they have, or whatever. So I knew that without people's understanding of the principles changing, and therefore their relationship to their thought changing, and therefore their freedom of mind changing, nothing changes. You can't have the same amount of energy coming through your mind and have a different outcome. You can't. It's literally impossible. It's actually impossible. But if you have a more restricted energy coming through your mind, things will get worse, is the way it looks to me. And if you have less restricted, they will get better, right? So I knew that. So what's interesting is that an understanding of the power of the mind, or the spiritual nature of the mind, or the nature of that energy, of what, you know, some of our work we call the nature of the mind, or clarity of mind, or freedom of mind, or whatever, is the active ingredient that allows people to do what they're trying to do in their business. So for example, if you have this is quite a good one. I was working with a team in an engineering firm who hated their customer. And because they hated their customer, they had all this negative thinking about their customer. They had a lot of ill will towards their customer. The customer didn't really appreciate them. And because their customer didn't really appreciate them, he wanted to get rid of them. And if he got rid of them, they stood to lose millions of dollars. So all of a sudden, they want help. So they say, Aaron, we need help. How do you have a good relationship with someone you hate? I'm like, well, you can't do that. That's literally impossible. And they say, well, we're screwed then, because our customer is unlovable. More than that, he's unlikable. More than that, he's impossible not to hate. And I said to them, well, that's not true, because now this part's between you and I know that in a purer mind, people have appreciation, compassion, goodwill, care, love. They have that. That's just the way it is. And they only don't have that if they get attached to some personal reactive thought in which they become temporarily divorced from their own clarity, their own sanity. Okay. So I basically said to them, yeah, you have to be willing to like this person. And they all said, no way, not happening. Show me how you do that. So I did some demonstrations of like listening with an open mind, and they found it impossible to stay hateful. And they're like, well, yeah, I see how you did that, but we can't do that. So, okay, fine. But unbeknownst to me, the director of the group was listening to this and realized, wow, I do that. I go to this guy's office and I don't expect to have fun. I expect to have a hard time. I expect to have an unpleasant time. Why would I do that? So he starts to question the reality of his own thinking. This doesn't make sense. Why would I operate in unpleasantness when I could just as easily enjoy my time with him? I know that. I understand the principles. I could have a free mind. So what happened is he stopped holding on to his resentment and trepidation. And as a result, he started naturally really enjoying his time with this guy. And as a result, he became his best buddy. And as a result, he got all the inside scoop when they recompeted the program. And as a result, they extended and kept that program. The principles, the spiritual nature of it points to the fact that if your mind opens up more, you get more power, or you get more clarity, you get more energy, you get more useful thought, you get more richness, you get more wisdom, you get more intelligence. That plays out in a useful way for you. So I'm working with a population. My success with them depends on them realizing and leaving in a deeper way with the spiritual nature of themselves in the work world. And to me, it's important that they understand that. It's not, I can't just manipulate them into it and they'd be okay, because they need to navigate it on a go forward basis. But there is no way on earth that I can deal with that using the common conceptions of spiritual. See, the common conception of spiritual is that it's unusual and not to do with the real world, and somehow on a deeper plane that's not to do with the person and their daily life. And in a way, there's this concept of the spiritual where it's kind of, what's that, esoteric. And that to me, the main challenge of people one of the main challenges of a lot of people in our world realizing the power of the mind and its nature, whether you call it spiritual or whether you call it whatever, is this funny conception of the spiritual that has the special rich part of it, but doesn't really recognize the fundamental, unavoidable, real essence of everything part of it. The normal part of it, the unavoidable part of it, right? So we might have someone in the business say, oh, I'm not really into spiritual things, okay? But I love going for walks with my kids. Why? Why do you like go for? Oh, that's when I really feel connected and I feel richness, and everybody's interested in that. If you talk to people, everybody's looking for what they think is going to give them that feeling of resonance that makes them feel like their life is rich. And that's their experience of a less obstructed part of what they actually are. And what they actually are is what they actually are. Like, we were doing one seminar and somebody said, yeah, well, if this is what we really are, why are we even talking about it? You make it weird just by talking about it. Like, okay, fine. Yeah, I get that. Anyway. So there's a way in which my work in this area has to point to the reality of it, not the concept. The concept sounds weird in a way that people stop listening in my work. So I have to focus on the reality of it. The fact that when you have less on your mind, you feel richer. The fact that when you have your mind, a freer level of your mind available to you, you feel things different, you see things different, you think things different, you live things different, you have different relationships. And when you don't feel that, it hasn't gone anywhere, but you've gone somewhere a little bit unuseful in your conception of things. And that's true, and that's normal, and it's undisputable. Like, I had someone in the business say to me, Aaron, you're wrong. I said, well, what do you mean I'm wrong? He says, well, I don't work better when I have a clear mind. I work better when I'm stressed. Right? It doesn't work that way. It just does not work that way. So I said, well, what do you mean? He says, well, I said, tell me what happens. He says, well, I'm super lazy. So I have to get really stressed in order to do anything. I said, well, how does that work? He says, well, I basically tell myself, you lazy, you lazy bugger. If you don't get going, you're going to lose your job. And I panic. And then I start working. And I'm like, what happens when you're working? Is it hard? He's like, no, it's easy. I'm just clicking. I said, okay, so you scare yourself into a clearer mind. He's like, yeah, I guess I do. And it's this fact that the power and the capability and the feelings you're looking for are already there because of the nature of things, whatever you call it. That reality I have to show people in a way that's really normal, really ordinary, but really real. Really, really real. So we worked with this team recently, and then I can't see. No, I want to make sure you have time.
We're good, Aaron.
Yeah, I just saw that. So we worked with this team recently. I've talked about this elsewhere because it's such a good example. But we were asked to work with this team in a business. It was a branch of the business that is doing really badly. Okay, and the staff were fairly disaffected. The customer feedback was not very good. And they just refurbished their offices, but there was no feeling in it. So the CEO says, look, this place is good, right? It looks really nice, but it doesn't feel nice. It doesn't have a feeling. I was like, that's exactly what we focus on. We show people how to work in a state of mind in which there's a lot of presence and feeling. So he says, well, you're the first people I've come across that do that. So why don't you work with them and see what happens? I said, be my pleasure. So we did interviews with this team. And what was interesting is they were very normal in the sense that most people work in a very disassociated state, meaning they don't work with a lot of engagement. They don't work with a lot of freedom of mind. They don't work with a lot of joy. They don't work with a lot of ease. They're not very open and connected with their colleagues. They're typically stressed, wrapped up in their own anxiety and agitation, busily trying to get their stuff done, annoyed by people that are trying to work with them because they get in the way, annoyed by people that don't give them what they need when they need it because they're making their life harder. And they really feel like they're doing their best. This group really felt like they were doing their best in a bad situation with unhelpful, incompetent colleagues, with a difficult client situation, and they didn't have time to do anything. And so they told us afterwards that there were 10 people in the leadership team. 9 of them begged the boss to get off. Like, boss, you got to get me out of this. I can't do this. Like, 9 of them begged to get out of the program. And Leela and I knew that. We knew that we were going to be spending 3 days with 10 people that didn't want to spend any time with us and were not really open to the idea that things could be different, and definitely were not open to the idea that it could be coming from them. Definitely not. Definitely not. Because they didn't know there was something else. They didn't know there was more gas in the tank. They didn't know that there was something richer kind of underneath. But they don't need to know that. They would find that out when we met. So what was really interesting is we decided to not try to sell them on the program, but just to be more at ease ourselves and to just kind of get with them and just have a nice time and talk it through with them. And afterwards, all of them said, when I turned up here, I really wasn't interested. I'm like, what's this stuff about? I don't want to be here. But within 5 minutes, I thought, you know what? I'll give it a try. Now, we have worked harder to get people engaged, and it's taken longer. And to me, that points to the normal, unavoidable spiritual nature of human beings. That when we turned up that way, there was something about it that they were willing to go with in a quicker, easier way than when we do a big song and dance about here's what's relevant and here's how it applies to your objectives and here's and it was really real. Like, they really felt something that resonated with them. They didn't understand it, they didn't have a name for it, they couldn't explain it, but they couldn't deny it, and they couldn't escape it. That shows you how fundamental it is. You don't even have to talk about it if it's real. People just need to feel it. And the training went that way for 3 days. They kind of went deeper and deeper and deeper. And what was so interesting is, on the third day, they resonated with things on and off throughout the first 2 days. But on the third day, they really clicked. And they felt something different within themselves. And that's when they saw the significance of it for themselves. And I don't think any of them would have called it spiritual, but they found themselves having a richer experience at home with their families, with their kids. And they found themselves realizing that the way they'd been living didn't make sense. And then when they went back to work, they found themselves realizing that the way they were going about work didn't make sense. That why didn't they just help each other? And why didn't the people that they were giving, there were people that they were upset were not doing their job properly, so they were micromanaging them. Why didn't they get on with them? Why didn't they encourage them? Why didn't they have a nice time with them? And all of a sudden, the core team are helping each other effortlessly, which they weren't before. Problems are getting solved quicker. They're leaving work earlier, but they're getting more done. And the people that used to be behavioral problems are now actively helping to make the place better. That's an unleashing of the spiritual. But we never said that. We would never say that. But they discovered something that was true about life, that is the only meaningful thing, that there's richness there, there's potential there. So one of the guys came in and said, you know, I try to make myself happy by getting new motorbikes. And I'm always happy with it when it's new, but within 6 to 12 months, I'm not happy with it and I'm getting a new one. That's me, isn't it? That's me. Like, that richness is coming from me. And I realized I could enjoy the one I've got now. And I went out and it was awesome. And I was about getting ready to sell it. So our relationship to the power behind life through our thought is the only thing happening. So you can't do anything without having a feel for that. You can't change anything. You can only try harder at the level of consciousness that you're at. So you have to go deeper and have less on your mind for anything to change. And you need to know that as real. But for it to be real, there's two parts of it. There's like the unbelievable, unfathomable richness and wonder of it. But there's also the normalness, the undeniable, inalienable part of it. And that paradox is in a way more mind-boggling than either part. That like, I had a client a couple of weeks ago, and they couldn't get their head round how genius they'd been at one point, and then what a complete klutz they were, you know, the same afternoon. And they were literally disturbed by it. They were literally disturbed by it. Like, what is wrong? I must have a serious malfunction here. It's like, no, that's what it means to live this potential through thought. That's what it means. That's normal. And it's the amazing normalness of it that that I'm forced to grapple with in my work, because it has to be normal otherwise, and it has to be real, otherwise it's not credible. It has to be real, otherwise it's not credible. And what's interesting is, what's true about the mind is outside the realm of normal, but it's real. So we're having to show people how to consider there's something real that's outside the realm of what's normal. so that they can have a new normal that includes a recognition of this formless power that's generating life. And on the other hand, if they really don't get their mind blown by the unfathomable power and potential of it, the fact that it's in action all the time, then it's also a lose.
Mm-hmm.
It's also a lose. So people get attached to the specialness and they alienate themselves from the fact of it. So I love the work I do, because you have to have the full package.
Yeah.
And the full package is unbelievably amazing, and you couldn't possibly fathom, but it's all day, every day, completely normal. You can't get away from it. And it's beyond your imagination, but it's totally real. It's the only thing that's real. And that's kind of the wonder that I've kind of come to in my work, because when I go too much into the technical, here's how it works, it loses the richness, and it's completely unhelpful. But if I find myself going into the wonder of it and people can't feel the reality of it, then I lose them there as well. So I guess one of the things I love about my work is it keeps me honest. And the other part is, sometimes people think, well, business people aren't interested in that. Well, I tell you, when they feel it, they are. When they feel it, they are. So I've had people say, I love this training. I've hated every other training I've done in my entire career, but I'm feeling it here. I really like this, because if it's real and it's them, it resonates. And that's how we know a lot of times when we're on track or off track, is like, we have to be willing to consider, oh, this is the true essence of everybody and everything. So if we're in the right direction, it's profoundly impactful for everybody, at home, in their jobs, on the way to work, in their shopping habits, everywhere. And the more I go with that assumption, because I don't fully understand it, the more of an education the principles proves to be, because it all says, oh, that's right, that's true. Wow, that was beyond what I thought. I didn't really realize it was that true, was that fundamental, was that universal, and that impactful.
Oh, thank you, Aaron. And I just so appreciate how you do speak to this in such a practical way that is so relatable and so experiential, not caught up in your head, but just so real and easy, the way you were describing how you and Leela went into that group. But yet I feel that richness, the depth, the possibility. So it's you have such a beautiful way of bringing those two together and feeling the impact. So I want to thank you.
It's an absolute pleasure, and it's a pleasure to share it, because it's just sharing discoveries that I've seen and the feeling of them, really. So it's a pleasure, because I want everybody to stumble on these things.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, are you okay if we go to questions now?
No.
All right, then, change of plan.
No, I am.
I'm kidding.
I just wanted to say
I'm kidding. I knew you were joking. All right, Sue, I'm going to unmute you. Hi,
Sue's
Sue.
got 2 questions.
Hiya.
Hiya.
You know what? I'm not even sure if my question is relevant anymore, but I'm just going to give it a go. Little bit of backstory. I've been agoraphobic for 20 years. Came across the principles 2 years ago. I used to use alcohol in order to go to places that I had to go.
Yes.
Now, my daughter graduated from university last Tuesday.
Wow.
And it was 2 hours away.
Yes.
And I went with no alcohol.
Good for you.
However, I live like 2 minutes away from the beach. You know, we've got a heat wave coming. Tomorrow I'm planning to go to the beach. I've got a whole load of thinking about going 2 minutes away. But because I knew I had to go 2 hours away, I did it. I'd like to kind of know what your take is on that.
On which part, Joe?
So
Oh, Sue. Sorry, I knew it was 2 letters. I got them wrong. You mean, are you asking how come you could go 2 hours, but the beach is difficult, or am I mistaken? Yeah. There's no reason. It's all made up. See, the thing is, it's like if you're really willing to consider that there can be nothing really wrong with you fundamentally, you can just have thought generated experiences that there are, you know, so your thought says boo, right? Then you can really consider that the only difference is the ones we work around and the ones we go straight through. That's the only difference. And I'll give you an example, right? So before I learned the principles, I was super paranoid about flying, and every time I flew, I thought I would die. But I always went.
Yeah, I can't relate to that because I was almost backed into a corner to go to the graduation.
Yeah.
I was like, you know what? I either go or I die trying.
There you go. There you go. Yeah. And the thing is, the more you start to consider what the principles are saying, you'll realize I either go or I feel like I'm dying trying.
Yeah.
You're not going to die from a thought. It's not going to happen.
You know, I know that. Deep down, I know that. You know,
there you go.
But it was kind of the attitude. Will I either go or I die trying?
Yeah. Well, I like people to get to the point where they feel like, who's afraid of the big bad thought? You know, it's like you can have a thought have its way with you, but it can only get into your sensory system. It can't get into your governing nervous system. It can't do that. You know, it's psycho-spiritual TV. See? And there's a difference between reality and TV, you know, like and if you can start to see that, I went to the beach, and while I was at the beach, my mind played a horror show. And in the breaks, I had a good time. But
yeah, that's a nice way of looking at it.
It could play that same show at home, just thinking about going to the beach, or what time is it and what do I have to do later? I mean, it's a complete virtual thing that can't do anything other than create an experience that has nothing to do with what you do. So the less frightened people are of being frightened or of the experiences that they don't like, they kind of have to call its bluff. So,
yeah.
So my brother I think this is a good analogy. My brother's a teacher, right? And he was saying to me, you know what, Aaron, it's really interesting when you're a teacher, because you have this delicate line, because you are not allowed to do anything to the kids. You're not allowed to do anything. Really not even really allowed to shout. You definitely can't touch them. And there's nothing you can do that they really care about. You got nothing, right? But they have to think you've got something, because if they know you got nothing, you got no leverage. It's chaos, right?
Yeah, you've lost it.
You have to threaten in a way that they never call your bluff, because if they call your bluff, you're going to have to show them you got nothing, and then you have to go to another school, right?
That's clever.
Now, your thinking's the same. It's got nothing. It's got nothing. It's got feelings. It's got intensity. It's got virtual reality, but it's got nothing. Ask it what next. Oh, I'm terrified. Yeah, and what's next? You're still terrified. Yeah, and what comes after that? Terrified? And then what happens? I'm terrified. Okay, and then what? Oh, nothing. Off you go to the beach then.
I'm going to try that tomorrow morning. Oh, that's brilliant.
And that is true. It's true, but you have to be willing to call its bluff. You have to be willing to see what happens if you don't worry about a thought, you don't listen to a thought, you don't drive around a thought. What happens? And you'll find out nothing. There's no penalty whatsoever. It's completely fine. It's like a no parking area that you never get a ticket for. You can park there, you know. Oh, it says no parking. Yeah, but there's no tickets, so what's the difference?
Yeah. Wow. Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks for your question.
Thank you,
I
Sue.
avoided an awkward silence.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to next go to Lee. I'm unmuting you. Hi, Lee.
Hi there. Hi, Rohini.
Hi.
Rohini, sorry, Rohini.
Yeah, no, that's
Rohini.
fine. That's fine. No worries. I've heard a lot worse. Let's put it that way.
Oh, there's Lee. Hey.
Hey, Aaron.
Hey.
I can't see yet, but that's okay. Right, so I'm still in a wow mode of the insight that you just gave me at that moment. So I'm I'm sort of lost for words a little bit. And
It's okay.
You've actually answered my question in a lot of different ways already. I'm still going to ask it, of course, but so we have a weekend seminar coming up next week, and I'm not promoting, by the way, it's full, so I'm not promoting or anything, but it sort of morphed into a business meeting, which is, it wasn't purposefully, it wasn't like we were fighting it or anything, but it's become that. And up until this moment, I was really looking forward to it. And now, now I'm thinking, maybe I'll cancel, maybe. No.
Why?
After you saying about them not wanting to be there, you know. And,
Oh, thanks, Aaron. Thank you.
Oh, no, but that's just when we work with a leader and they want their people to go. These aren't people that signed up for it. Yeah.
Oh, I know.
They call it. They've been voluntold. That's what they call it.
Right. A what untold? Oh, voluntold. Right.
Voluntold. That's what they call it.
Right. So, being a complete 100% novice in terms of working with business, as I say, you've answered it in many ways already. And what if you were to sort of give one piece of advice? What would you give to myself going into a business setting and teaching the principles?
Well, the thing is, it's a little bit, this whole idea of a business setting and a business training,
right? It's
a little bit unhelpful, just like the idea of spiritual is something different.
Yeah.
It just creates a lot of thinking that's unnecessary. So you set up this seminar, you have people signed up for it, you have a feel for them, you have a feel for what it's about. That's all you need.
Right. Okay.
You know, so people get in their heads, they're like, oh, I think they're business people, but actually they're people that are there for some reason, that they worked out with you anyway, that you knew what you were doing. And this is just a really good example of how you can have a very open, fluid, capable mind, and then an insecure thought comes up and says, oh, I bet you didn't think of this. And then you're like, oh yeah, no, I didn't think of that. Oh my God, I think they might be business people.
Right.
Shoot, like, how's that different than normal people? And then if you don't see that your feeling has changed, you go into this alternate universe where you don't know what you're doing, and it's really scary, and the feeling tells you you're on a thought tangent. And one of the things that I've learned is we get lots of excuses for thought tangents. I got to seem professional, or it's this kind of thing, or it's really important, or if it doesn't happen. And the principles has pointed out to me, you don't want to have a good reason for an unhelpful thought tangent. And what's an unhelpful thought tangent? You don't feel so good anymore. You don't feel so confident anymore. You don't feel so comfortable anymore. And understanding the power of the mind is, there's no reason not to feel comfortable, because that's when you're knee deep in the power of mind, and that's what you want. You know, that's what you want. And you don't want to make up for it, you know, with charts or PowerPoints or this or that. You felt good about what you were doing. That means you were connected to it. If something turns up while you're doing it, you want to have that same comfort and ease of mind for useful thinking to come out of. It's the genius of mind. You gotta have space for the genius of mind.
Gotcha.
And that's the importance of pointing to the spiritual part, whatever you call it. It's like, oh, you don't have to do that. That doesn't come from you. we're the passenger, not the driver. You just got to be on the right bus.
Right.
So it's the same. It's the same. It's the same. It's the same. Like when I got involved in business, it was different than being a counselor, okay? Because people didn't want your help, but the feeling wasn't different. The feeling was the same, and actually more important, because there was less wiggle room. So the feeling was more important. So you want to be really uncompromising about your willingness to feel comfortable, even though you have a million thoughts why you shouldn't be.
Excellent. Yeah.
I got to it eventually. That'd be my.
No, that's fantastic. So, that really clarifies it. And now I'm going to unclarify. So, you mentioned about with businesses you have to be more practical and and you know, you have to sort of find that midway, I guess. So I'm clarifying the fact that you just clarified it. With me just being present, that's how I'm going to find it.
Well, really, a more fundamental way of saying that, Lee, is if you're more present, you're going to find a way that you can talk to people that they relate to, that they resonate with, and that's meaningful to them.
Right.
That's all you're looking for. And you're looking for that whether you're talking to a 3-year-old or a 70-year-old or a priest or a doctor or an unemployed person or a school teacher. That's true for everybody. So you can't have a way of doing it. You can only have the formless intelligence of mind to inform you if that's what you're up to. You don't want to fall asleep at the wheel. You just want to see. And you do that. If someone stopped you in the street, Lee, and said, oh, how do I get to the post office? You would find a way of telling them that they could relate to and retain. It's exactly the same. It's exactly the same. You don't want to let your mind make more of it than you need to.
Yes.
My mind does that. Oh, we work with businesses and we have to do this and we have to. No, that's all made up.
Right.
It just makes it harder for me.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's really clarifying and actually feeling a lot better about it now. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it.
That's lovely. Thank you, Lee. Thank you so much. All right, we'll go on to the next person. That is Shannon. Shannon Cooper, I'll unmute you. Hi, Shannon.
Hi. I just wanted to first say, Aaron, thank you so much for just doing the work you do. This is the first time that we've got a chance to speak, but I have probably watched everything that is available by you, and it has just changed my life. So thank you.
Oh, I'm really happy to hear that.
No, really, really just profoundly transformative. I'm very curious about bringing the principles to the environmental crisis and kind of bridging that gap.
Yes.
I recently watched the Tier 1 solution conferences and I was like, wow, this is definitely necessary. So my question's a bit of a two-parter. The first one is the $1 million question, which is how do we, in Aaron Turner's mind, how do we most quickly and effectively raise the global level of consciousness? And part B is very similar to what you touched on earlier, which is when you talked about, you know, we have that funny concept of spirituality, especially in business, but I think we have a funny concept of nature. Like when we think nature, oh, it's the polar bears out there and it's the Amazon and it's not us, it has nothing to do with our daily lives and the, you know, the water, and so for me, what I come across in my own daily life with people being like, well, the climate crisis isn't my thing and nature's not my thing, and I'm just like, I see that our idea of nature, the concept of nature that many of us have in our head is what stops us seeing how real, practical, everyday
Absolutely.
it is. And so as a 3P teacher, how do we point people to the reality of that and not the concept? So those are my two kind of questions.
Yeah, they're really, really good questions. And you're 100%, I mean, I just resonate with what you're saying. I think that's very true. So how do we most quickly raise the global level of consciousness is I'm just working on my best theory to date all the time. so I don't really know. I mean, when I started, it was like, yeah, work with people. And then I thought, no, we got to train practitioners and we have to work with organizations so it becomes viral and it gets into the mainstream. So that's kind of the approach you're working with. And now I'm realizing, well, no, there must be a more accessible way. So we're kind of working on a start to finish basic introductory and this online, really accessible, affordable introduction to the principles. So that's, and then we're looking at, well, what if you could do more PR? So that's like a work in progress for like, how do we do that? And we just try to stay in our grounding and keep with our momentum and keep pushing ourselves in a way that we hope will do that. So that's kind of, I know
it's the $1 million question, but I couldn't not ask.
but that's how we're going about it, because one of the just to say, one of the things that we found is if we get ahead of our own grounding, we start losing traction. So I suddenly realized, the question is not, can we do more? The question is, what's the most impactful thing we can do given where we're at to stay in line with where our own traction is. So it's been a bit of a balancing act. Like we kind of got ahead of ourselves and then pulled ourselves back, and then we kind of plateaued and realized, no, we can push it. So we're doing our best about that, but it's obviously something we can talk more about. I'm happy to talk more about. I'm interested in that. So that's number one. But the more I've learned about the principles, the more I realize our conception of everything is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
Absolutely ridiculous. The idea that, the way we think about the body, the way we think about the environment, the way it's just, you start to look at that and you're like, oh my God, how are we ever going to see this in a way that's going to work?
Yeah.
Like, we don't see the living nature of the environment. We don't see ourselves as part of it. We don't think of it in a very sensitive, open-minded, relational way. We just don't see it and we don't feel it. So I agree with you. I think that, what I really see that's interesting, Shannon, is the way that we could see the environment or the planet or nature. We need a jump in consciousness to see that. Like, you can't see this from where our average consciousness is. You can't. You just can't. It's impossible. So that gives me hope, because it's like, it's only through a rising consciousness you'll see that. And actually, I do think we're seeing that. Like, I'm shocked at the number of people whose consciousness is starting to shift, and they're starting to think about what they eat and how they eat and how they go about it. And I do think it's accelerating. It's going to sound ridiculous, but over the last 6 weeks, it's really weird to say that. But I also think that being more conscious about that. So I used to think, oh, we'll just teach people the principles, their consciousness will go up and that'll take care of everything. But I also think that being more conscious about the raising consciousness and where it can be useful, like we do that with our business clients. It's like, yeah, if you want to have goodwill, you can't have this thinking about each other. And I think that would be something we could be more conscious of in the work we do in the environmental space. I think that's really, really, really important. I don't know. Maybe listening to you, maybe there's a way people that are interested in that should be coming together and kind of brainstorming that, not necessarily to do anything together, but just to get the momentum of that clarity and inspiration. Maybe that's something that should happen.
Yeah, we are, luckily. There's a group of us that meet every Friday to talk about specifically that, the 3 Ps.
No.
Yes.
Oh, that's cool.
Yes, we've had 3 webinars so far, so it's been
cool.
Really good. But obviously, I was like, I just couldn't miss this opportunity to get your thoughts on it, because you speak with such clarity and conviction. So I was like, have to ask Aaron and see what he thinks. So thank you. I really appreciate it.
That's a pleasure. It's very cool what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Shannon. And thank you for doing that. Thank you for organizing, doing the webinars. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. There you go.
All right, Aaron. I know we're at the top of the hour, but are you okay? We have 2 more hand raised. Can we do those final 2 questions? Does that work for you?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'll go to Christy and then it'll be Stella afterwards. So Christy, let me unmute you. Hi, Christy.
Hi. Hi, Erin.
I'm gonna scrolling to find you. Where are you, Christine?
I'm here.
Oh, there you are, Christy. Not Christine. Hiya. Hi.
Hi, Erin.
Hi. How you
So,
doing?
Erin, something came up as you were talking today that I've explored it in other contexts, but since it came up, I thought I'd bring it up here. It's on performance. And so I've heard, like, the less I have on my mind, better performance.
Yes.
Or the less I've also heard the less I care about what I have on my mind. Same thing. I have an experience where I have two different experiences about that. And so if I hear or see more, that would be great. I went up to Salt Spring to see Chip and Elsie.
Great.
And yeah.
I
And so,
highly recommend that.
yeah. And so I had a really nice experience at the spiritual nature of everything. I also had something that was really burning on my mind, like something that was just like the experience was quite polar, the depth, and also something that was really kind of shitty. So I went out kayaking with a new friend, and she just said, "Do you want to talk about it?" And long story short, on that aspect of it, as soon as I told her, the kayaking was as if I had done it all my life, and it was my first time. And I noticed that I was in flow, that it was easy, that and the person I explored this with, they also pointed out the feeling. Like, did you notice? Because it was completely effortless, and I noticed. Okay, so something came off my mind. Wow, look at that.
Yes.
Didn't have a whole lot of thinking about kayaking, a little bit,
Yeah.
but I mean, it was so remarkable. Well, part of what I also enjoy doing is writing poetry. And that is just something over the last like 5 years that I have a little bit of a rhythm and a recognition and study the craft. Well, earlier this spring, prior to Salt Spring, I had a run at writing poetry where it was just coming through. The state that I was in was unusually anxious. Like it was just really uncomfortable in the springtime. And yet I was not writing to relieve my feeling. It was literally just coming through. I didn't like the experience of anxiety. It didn't change after I wrote poetry. This was like days. And so I looked at these two experiences, and this is like, well, I just feel a little bit unsatisfied about the less I care what I have on my mind versus that the kayaking experience, so the less I have on my mind. Something you said today started to kind of maybe seep in about power and then the resistance or something of that. You were saying something earlier in the conversation, so I just thought I'd ask about that, because it does seem to be a place where I get it's not that I'd like to best where it's coming from is like, if I'm coaching somebody and I've had this experience, I don't want to make any particular conclusion about it's this or it's that. I've had kind of both, where for me it's like the art cut through. I like what I wrote. I'm like that objectively, like, those two are good, this one not so much. I'm like, how did that happen? Yeah, there's the kayaking. So if you hear something, that would be great.
Well, I'm not 100% sure what you're asking, because it sounds like you were writing in a flow. No? Christy, or?
Yeah, well, I could definitely hear what was wanting to be written. Like, I know it's not me.
There you go. There you go. So
and then there was just, and at the same time, it's just extremely sort of this anxious for like, I don't know if it was a week or two or what have you.
Yeah. Well, that just points to what we were talking about with Sue. It's like you can be in a flow. There's a, you know, there's deeper waters in the mind. So you can, if you listen, you can know what makes sense, and you knew what made sense to write, whilst at the same time during that period having anxious thinking. But had you been completely wrapped up in the anxious thinking, I think you would have written something different.
Not at all.
Well, no, because I don't think that you would have heard what it made sense to write if you were preoccupied with your anxiety in that moment. Now, I could be wrong. That's just could be my construct. But I would be shocked. See, you can't, in my experience, you can't listen in two directions at one time. You can listen to your anxious thinking, and you can listen beyond it, right? I don't think, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, but I haven't experienced being able to listen to my anxious thinking and something beyond. But just because you have anxious thinking doesn't mean you have to be listening to it, so you can still listen for something beyond. What makes sense?
Okay.
There are levels of thought. There are, yeah. We can think about things in a very personal way, but there are more impersonal levels of thought that's less wrapped up in our preferences and desires and worries and insecurities and blah blah blah. And what you're pointing to is you can have very personal anxious thought, but just because you have it doesn't mean you have to live in it. There's something else there to draw on, to listen to.
Okay. That's helpful.
Which is what you said is a really good example of that.
Okay. Thank you, Aaron.
That was a pleasure. Thanks for the question.
Good to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you too.
Thank you. All right, so the final question is with Stella. Hi,
You
Stella.
slave driver.
I know, I'm sorry.
Boom, 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 boom.
You should talk to Angus and tell you.
Whoa. That's so
Stella, you're unmuted. Are you there?
Hi, Rohini.
Hi,
Hi.
Stella. Lovely to see you.
There you are.
Hi, Aaron.
Hi.
Hi. Yeah, I don't know if it's a question so much as an observation that I'd like to get your opinion on. I'm an only child, and I've always lived quite inside my own head. But I've never been what you'd call like anxious or an overthinker or anything. And I've had periods, even when I was a very young child, where where there's been like neutrality going on. There's no thoughts there at all. I can literally sit there and think there's nothing. There's been like I wasn't thinking about anything. And that's like continued. I'm 47 now, and it's continued like right throughout my life. And I've always put it down to being an only child, being quite comfortable in my own sort of like skin and solitary time and that. But I've also, in the last year, I discovered the principles, like the concept of the principles, I suppose about a year ago. It had a name, and I got hell bent on finding out. I suppose, like most people do, everything I could about it, like literally YouTube, watch loads of Rohini's like YouTube channel and yourself and everybody I could get my hands on. I watched stuff, and it just went clunk. It was like that boom moment. I've always been aware of it, but I didn't have the actual words to give to it.
Yes.
And since I've had words, like I've had like, oh, that's what that is. That is what that is. That's the principles. I've always known that I wasn't my thoughts. Like, it was just a projection that was a cinema screen that I was, yeah, that's not my thoughts. You know, I'm watching my thoughts. Like I was watching myself play as a child. I was like, I'm going to play this game. I could see it from a distance.
Yes.
But since I've had a hook to hang it on, so to speak, it seems to have just been attracting all of this stuff that's around the principles. People who have also got the knowledge of what the understanding is. I seem to be attracting people to me that have got that understanding. And also the work that I'm involved in. I do a lot of charity work, a lot of fundraising, but I work with people who are quite vulnerable, like homeless people. I work in a homeless project. And I've found that people go, "You're really calm," like, and I've seemed to have calmed even more. I've always been quite laid back, I suppose. It's calmed me even more, knowing that I'm not weird. This isn't just like a thing that I do. That I just go, oh yeah, so I'm coasting. I'm on neutral. I'm not getting het up where other people are freaking out. And I just wondered if that was an experience that other people who have the understanding around it have got a shared experience of that.
You mean of discovering that there was something about the way they were operating that made sense? You mean? Not well, yes, for everybody in some aspects of their life, but I have come across people regularly, but not always frequently, who are like, oh, I didn't know everyone could be like this. This explains the way I've been, and it really does a lot for them in the way that you described. And I also really liked what you said, Stella, about as you start to feel more at ease and kind of drop into what I would call kind of a deeper normal, right? Different people will resonate with you, will come to you, will pull you aside. We see that in our training. So we do practitioner trainings, and you can see when someone drops to a new normal, and they'll come in and they'll say, 5 people asked to talk to me this week, and I've been around them for the last 3 months and they haven't said anything. And that's when you really start to realize, oh, we are living in the way this formless power comes into our reality, and that's what people resonate with. That's what's happening. That's what people are feeling. That's what they're responding to. And then you start to see, God, it's real. That is really real. It's really true what you're saying. But like I said at the beginning, we're so mesmerized by the physical nature of this world that we see these patterns in action, but we have a hard time saying, oh, that's how it works. Always, that's how it works.
I went to a networking event. I live in Wales, and I went to Cardiff to the Senate and the Parliament building. There was a networking event there. It was a women's networking event. And there was probably about 30 women there to sort of network with, talk to. And for some reason, I was just drawn to this one woman. I sat down opposite her. We started talking, and she was launching a new charity initiative, working with refugee families. And not something that I've got any experience of, but we just clicked straight away. The next day, we contacted each other. A week later, I was travelling to Cardiff so she was asking me to be a consultant in this charity, and if I'd help her, because even though I've got no experience of that directly, maybe other skills I've got would help. And it was just, but she one of the things she said to me was, are you religious? Are you spiritual? And I said, I don't consider myself religious. I consider myself spiritual, but I also consider myself an atheist. But I do believe there's an energy. It's the only way I could explain it. I didn't want to get into the whole, I believe in this thing called the 3 principles, but I just went, I believe there's an energy that connects everybody and that we all resonate on the same sort of frequency. And she went, I knew as soon as you sat down that we were just going to resonate. We just straight away. And it was this really, really strange thing. I just wanted to sort of like put that out there and see if, it was something that did resonate with some people.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Stella. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, Rohini. Thank you.
And Erin, I just want to thank you for working overtime on the webinar today and for showing up. And thank you for being the first speaker in the Soul Centered series.
Oh,
I'm really excited to have you come to Santa Monica and just really speak to that dance between the profound and the practical, and see where that takes the group. But thank you for sharing all of that here. And is there anything else you'd like to share in terms of, are there any other programs for you?
No, I mean, we do practitioner programs, which are on our website. They're starting in the fall. We are hoping to launch like a basic online start to finish programming the principles that will be very accessible again in the fall. If you're interested, you can get notified if you email info@onethought.com. But what I really wanted to say was, it's so nice to see everybody's faces on here and to see you listening and to get your questions. And I'm glad that so many people joined, and it was a real pleasure to be able to kind of talk for a little while.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Erin.